Marvel Spider-Man 2 sees Miles Morales enlisting Peter Parker's help to take on various villains, some familiar and others new. Along with confirming the return of Mr. Negative, Sandman also appears, looking gargantuan and making for an epic set piece. A decent chunk of the gameplay revealed so far also features Peter possessed by the symbiote and lashing out at his friends. There's also plenty of Venom, who looks pretty terrifying, but even with all the new additions, the sequel will be about as long as the first game. Marvel Spider-Man 2 is out on October 20th for PS5. In recent weeks, we have published each game's story as its own video, but now we've compiled it all together in one single video, as we think this will make for a better viewing experience. What's more, you can now watch the entire story in 4K and 60 FPS. As such, we're going to recap the events of everything that has happened in the series so far, paving the way and preparing for Marvel's Spider-Man 2.
Do your thing.
Yes! Ease the date, Willie! Heads up! Hey, where are you going?
Marvel's Spider-Man smartly makes the decision to not tell an origin story. We're all very familiar with how Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man, after all, instead dropping us into its universe at a time when Peter is a little older than what you'd normally expect, and has in fact been doing the whole Spider-Man thing for 8 whole years. During this time, he's crossed paths with and defeated a number of iconic villains in the Spider-Man Rogue Gallery, many of whom have played a role in this game's story as well. But when the game kicks off, his sole focus is one man, and one man alone: Wilson Fisk. By this point, Peter has been trying for a while to take the crime lord down, and working together with the NYPD has slowly but surely been getting closer and closer. As the game begins, he's contacted by NYPD Captain Yuri Watanabe, who tells him that the police finally have enough evidence to arrest Fisk, and that the mission is underway. Spider-Man joins in, knowing that Fisk won't go quietly, and sure enough, things go the way you'd expect. Fisk fights back with all that he's got, but with Spider-Man's help, the NYPD is able to suppress his goons and arrest him. As he's being taken away though, he issues a warning to everyone that others are going to try and rise up and fill up the power vacuum he's left behind, which will inevitably create chaos across all of New York. Unsurprisingly, that's exactly what ends up happening, and it's not long before Peter crosses paths with the faction that makes the first and biggest move to fill up that void. He's soon alerted to an ongoing break-in at an art auction, and when he gets there, he sees that the culprits are a new gang that he's not very familiar with all of the goons wearing strange masks and wielding weapons that are imbued with a strange, supernatural energy. At the auction house, he also runs into Mary Jane Watson, his ex-girlfriend who works as a journalist for the Daily Bugle. MJ tells Peter that she was investigating the art auction since it's holding several of Wilson Fisk's illegal goods that were seized following his arrest. That includes a particular file that incidentally the goons that have broken into the auction house are also looking for. Peter and MJ's relationship is pretty strained at this point, though the two decide to work together on the investigation, beginning with getting their hands on that file. Peter distracts the goons while MJ is able to find the file, which contains details about a secret project known as the Devil's Breath. However, before she can find out more, the goons are able to take the file from here, following which they quickly make their escape. While MJ decides to keep digging into whatever Devil's Breath is, Peter instead decides that he's going to try and find out more about this mysterious new gang. To that end, he turns to the philanthropist Martin Lee, the owner of the homeless shelter known as Feast, which is where Aunt May works. Given that Lee has a college degree in art history, Peter figures that he might know something about the masks, which he does. He tells Peter that the group wearing masks are part of a gang called Inner Demons, that they're extremely dangerous, and that Peter should not get involved with them. But of course, as New York's web-slinger, he's most definitely going to get involved. Before that, however, he has to put a pause on his Spider-Man activities and get back, at least for a while, to his life as Peter Parker. Struggling to balance those two parts of his life as Peter Parker usually does in a great many Spider-Man stories, he heads to his actual job, where he works as a research assistant for the brilliant but penniless scientist, Dr. Otto Octavius. Unbeknownst to Peter, Otto suffers from a degenerative neurological disorder that will eventually cause him to lose all motor functions, motivated by which he and Peter are working on highly advanced prosthesis technology that could potentially replace lost limbs with perfect mechanical replications. In fact, Otto was once an extremely successful scientist in his own right. Though he hasn't found much success ever since founding Octavius Industries, back in the day he co-founded Oscorp Industries with his friend Norman Osborn. Eventually, however, he ended up suing and leaving the company due to ethical issues, more on that later, effectively ending his friendship with Norman Osborn, though Osborn still holds a grudge, it seems. While Peter and Otto are going about their work, they're visited by Norman Osborn himself, who is currently also the mayor of New York. Peter, of course, is also familiar with the man, having been best friends with his son Harry for all of his life. Though at this point in the story, Harry has been away in Europe for a while, or at least that's what Peter and MJ believe. Back to the story at hand though, after entering the lab, Osborn tells his former friend Otto that he has pulled the strings and cancelled his grant, effectively killing all funding for his research and shutting his project down. Back to his vigilante duties, Peter continues to look into the demons who have continued to systematically attack and seize what were once Wilson Fisk's properties. As part of his investigation into the demons, he begins working with NYPD officer Jefferson Davis, and together the two are able to foil some of the demons' plans. In the aftermath, Norman Osborn prepares to hold a re-election rally, where he also intends to officially recognize the heroism of Officer Davis. As Spider-Man, Peter has formed a pretty solid friendship with the officer by this point, so he, of course, plans to attend. The event is also attended by Davis's family, his wife and son, Rio and Miles Morales, as well as MJ, who goes with Peter, though things quickly take a turn for the worse at the rally. Promptly after pinning a medal on Officer Davis, Osborn receives an anonymous call from someone who makes some pretty lofty threats. Escorted by his security, Osborn quickly makes his exit, and soon after, the rally is attacked by the demons in devastating fashion. Suicide bombers cause carnage on the scene, which is followed by more demons moving in and starting to kill the straggling crowd. Here, Peter makes another shocking revelation when he sees the man leading them, none other than Martin Lee himself, who has the ability to completely encase himself in the weird negative energy that the demons infuse their weapons with. The attack is a devastating one. Officer Davis dies, and before Peter can do much of anything as Spider-Man, he's knocked unconscious. In the aftermath, Davis's family is obviously in mourning, though upon encouragement from Rio Morales, Peter and Aunt May get her son, Miles, a job as a volunteer at Feast. Meanwhile, in the aftermath of the attack, Osborn quickly takes action as well and hires a private military company from the nation of Symkaria, Sable International, tasking them and their leader, Silver Sublinova, better known as Silver Sable, with putting a stop to the demons and Martin Lee, or Mr. Negative as Spider-Man fans better know him as. With Peter and Silver Sable both after the same enemy, it's not long before they cross paths, though their first meeting isn't exactly a friendly one. Instantly, Silver Sable has a deep mistrust for Spider-Man, and she warns him to stay out of her and her soldiers' way. Peter, however, stubbornly continues his investigation to no one's surprise, and with MJ's help is soon able to unearth some vital pieces of information, like the fact that Martin Lee seems to be driven by a personal vendetta against Norman Osborn, which is why he's so desperately looking for the Devil's Breath. And what is that exactly? Well, it turns out the Devil's Breath is a highly lethal bioweapon that was inadvertently created by Oscorp under Norman Osborn's orders as part of the company's efforts to find a universal cure for diseases that cannot be cured. Make note of that because we'll get back to it in a bit. As luck would have it though, Lee and the demons eventually succeed in getting their hands on Devil's Breath, after which they attack Grand Central Station, where not only are they holding a great many hostages, including MJ, but are also planning on releasing Devil's Breath to infect the city. However, Spider-Man arrives on the scene, and with MJ's help, he's successful in stopping the demons' plans. In a fight in the subway that ends with a train barreling through a tunnel and coming to a chaotic stop on the streets of New York City, Peter is able to get his hands on the Devil's Breath and stop Mr. Negative, following which he's arrested by NYPD and imprisoned in the Raft, a high-security prison. As much of a reprieve as that is though, it proves to be a temporary one because things are also taking a turn for the worse where Peter's normal life, or comparatively normal at least, is concerned. When he returns back to work at his lab, he finds out that Dr. Octavius has continued his work on prosthesis and even wildly altered it, having attached 4 massive tentacle-like arms to himself, which he controls with an experimental neural link. Peter, however, is concerned and tells Otto that the tech is untested and could potentially have severe side effects, including even significantly altering his mood and personality. By this point, however, Otto is fueled by a deep-seated resentment towards Norman Osborn, and wanting nothing more than revenge against his former friend, he brushes Peter's concerns away. What Peter doesn't know is that behind his back, Otto has also been working with some pretty nefarious characters in his plan for revenge against Osborn that in fact includes Martin Lee, for reasons that are revealed at a later point in the story. In the here and now, what matters is this: with the help of his mechanical arm tentacles, Otto, who by this point has fully embraced the Dr. Octopus persona, attacks both Rikers Island and the Raft, freeing the inmates of both prisons and letting them loose on New York City. That is to say, the very least, a major problem. Not least because the Raft in particular houses some of the most dangerous villains Spider-Man has fought and defeated over the years. On top of Mr. Negative, that list also includes the likes of Scorpion, Vulture, Rhino, and Electro, all of whom have joined forces with Dr. Octopus to form the Sinister Six. At the Raft, with Yuri Watanabe's help, Spider-Man tries to stop the prison riot before it can go too far, though the Sinister Six combined powers prove to be too much for him to handle. Here, after badly losing a fight against the groups of villains, and learning what's truly become of Otto Octavius and what he's descended to, Peter loses consciousness. To make matters worse, Dr. Octopus is able to stealth the Devil's Breath back from NYPD, following which he instantly releases it in the crowded Times Square. Things quickly take a horrible turn for New York City in more ways than one. Thousands of inmates from both prisons are on the loose and running rampant throughout the city, while Scorpion, Electro, Rhino, and Vulture have all carved out little pieces of the city for themselves and are stirring up even more chaos. Meanwhile, thousands of New Yorkers have also been infected by the Devil's Breath bioweapon, and while providing care to the many people who have suddenly rushed to feast amidst the chaos, Aunt May too has fallen ill, though at least she's receiving plenty of help from Miles. Meanwhile, responding to the sudden flurry of catastrophes, Mayor Norman Osborn has declared martial law, which means Silver Sable and her Sable International goons are cracking down hard on New York City as well. All of which is to say that Spider-Man has his work cut out for him. One by one, he is able to take down Vulture, Electro, Rhino, and Scorpion and take them out of the equation once again. Meanwhile, MJ sneaks into Norman Osborn's penthouse in hopes of learning something about the Devil's Breath that might help them reverse its effects. And sure enough, she does uncover some pretty crucial details in a secret lab inside the penthouse. She finds out that Harry Osborn, her and Peter's lifelong friend, isn't in Europe after all, and that he's been suffering from a terminal illness that he's inherited from his mother that's been making him sicker and sicker. As it turns out, Devil's Breath was an accidental byproduct of research that Norman Osborn was doing to find a cure for Harry's disease. Another major revelation: years ago, a young Martin Lee who suffered from a chronic medical condition was a test subject to that very research, back when Otto Octavius was still in Oscorp. Unbeknownst to Otto, however, Norman injected the young boy with a much earlier version of the Devil's Breath serum, which triggered a violent reaction and explosion of energy originating from within that boy. The incident ended up killing Martin Lee's parents, leaving him not only with supernatural powers but also a deep hatred for Norman Osborn. And it was that incident that created the rift between Norman and Otto, with the latter leaving Oscorp in disgust of his former friend's actions. That, in fact, was how Otto was initially able to contact Martin Lee several years later again, bringing him into the fold about his plan to extract revenge from Osborn. Crucially enough, MJ also learns that there is indeed an anti-serum for the Devil's Breath, and also finds out the location of the lab where it's being kept. While in the lab, something she only notices in passing is a collection of genetically modified spiders, one of several weird experimental projects that Oscorp works on, and while she's escaping, doesn't realize that one of those spiders manages to latch onto her. Armed with all of the new information that MJ has learned, Spider-Man heads to the lab where he's supposed to find the anti-serum, though there, he has another face-off with Mr. Negative. A tough and grueling fight ensues, but Peter is finally able to defeat Martin Lee, this time for good. However, just as he's about to retrieve the anti-serum, Dr. Octopus arrives on the scene. He overpowers Peter with ease, following which he escapes not only with the anti-serum, but also a captured Norman Osborn in tow. Peter wakes up back at Feast, where he learns that Aunt May's condition is worsening at an alarming rate. Instantly, he gets to work on creating a new armored suit designed specifically to fight against Dr. Octopus. Meanwhile, at Feast, the genetically modified spider that MJ inadvertently brought back with her from Norman Osborn's penthouse manages to find its way to Miles and bites him. As you might imagine, that'll be relevant later. For now, let's get back to Peter, because as the game approaches its conclusion, Spider-Man has a final climactic confrontation against Dr. Octopus atop Oscorp Tower. With the help of his suit, Peter is able to subdue and defeat his former mentor, who reveals to him in defeat that he's known all along that Peter was Spider-Man, and very slyly implies that if Peter doesn't let him go, his secret might not exactly be safe with him. Peter, however, doesn't budge and leaves the scene as the police moves in to arrest Doc Ock. He returns to Feast with the anti-serum in hand and finds Aunt May on her deathbed. His instant instinct is to immediately give her the anti-serum and cure her, but he's informed that the amount of anti-serum available is either enough to cure a single person or to be used to mass-produce a cure for the entire city. Peter makes the heartbreaking choice of letting Aunt May die, who tells him in her final moments that she too was aware that he was Spider-Man all along. That's where the bulk of the story ends, though Marvel's Spider-Man still has a few bombs to drop in its final moments. A couple of months later, Peter and MJ are in a relationship again, while Peter and Miles' friendship is also continuing to grow. Speaking of which, the game's mid-credit scene shows a concerned Miles showing Peter that he's been developing spider-like powers as of late, with Peter responding by revealing to him that he is Spider-Man. Meanwhile, a post-credit scene reveals that Norman has been keeping Harry submerged in a stasis-like state inside a tank, where he's covered and being kept alive by a thick black goo-like substance that we all know as the infamous symbiote. And that's where Marvel's Spider-Man comes to a close. Spider-Man's 3-part DLC, The City That Never Sleeps, was all put together a pretty meaty additional chunk and one that was pretty eventful. Not only does it set the stage for the events of Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, it also sets up some secondary narrative threads that are very likely to be picked back up in the upcoming Spider-Man 2. Here, we're going to recap the entire story of Spider-Man's The City That Never Sleeps DLC. The City That Never Sleeps first episode, titled The Heist, is set not long after the ending of the base game. Some months have passed, and Peter has been spending that time talking with Miles about his newfound spider-like powers. At the same time, however, trouble is once again brewing in New York City. Wilson Fisk and the demons are gone, yeah, but once again they've left behind a power vacuum that others are now looking to fill up. Chief among those new contenders for the city's criminal throne are the 5 Magia families of New York, who are all fiercely competing with each other to climb to the very top. Against the backdrop of all of this, as part of her work as a journalist for the Daily Bugle, MJ, who's been investigating the Magia families, learns that one of the families intends to break into and rob an art museum. In particular, there's one painting being kept in a museum that was seized by the NYPD in a recent raid on one of the Magia families, which they now intend to recover. As you might imagine, upon learning this information, MJ informs Peter. And so it is that Spider-Man finds himself in that museum not long afterward. And sure enough, he finds it teeming with Magia goons. Doing whatever a spider can, Spider-Man dispatches his enemies and makes his way over to where the painting is being kept, and soon realizes that he's been beaten to it. He finds himself face to face with none other than Felicia Hardy, aka Black Cat, who also made a brief appearance in the base game itself and of course has had plenty of run-ins with Peter over the years. But Black Cat, as it turns out, has no interest in the painting itself. She breaks it in half, revealing that she was only there for a thumb drive hidden inside. With the drive now in her possession, she quickly makes her escape. Spider-Man leaves the museum as well, and thanks to new information uncovered by MJ, learns what exactly just went down. MJ tells him that she's tracked the drive's location and that it's now in possession of the criminal boss known as Hammerhead, who's one of the 5 Magia Dons, implying that he was the one who hired Black Cat to steal the drive. As it turns out, each of the 5 Magia families is in possession of one of these mysterious drives, and Hammerhead has hired Black Cat to steal the 4 that he doesn't have. To find out what exactly is in the drives, Peter tracks down Felicia, but when he asks about the drive's contents, she tells him she doesn't know. She does tell him, however, why she agreed to work with Hammerhead in the first place, and it seems like she didn't really have much of a choice. Felicia tells Peter that she has a son, and he's very strongly led to believe that he himself is the father. More importantly, however, the boy has been taken captive by Hammerhead, who's threatening to kill him if Felicia doesn't steal those thumb drives. With that bombshell, she departs again, leaving Peter stunned. As he's reeling from that shocking revelation, however, he learns more new pertinent information from MJ, who's managed to figure out why Hammerhead wants those drives so badly. As it turns out, a long time ago, as a means of keeping the peace amongst each other, the 5 Magia families pooled all their assets together and then split up that share into 5 pieces, with each family keeping one of them in hopes that they would all keep each other in check. Hammerhead intends to claim all 5, effectively taking the other 4 families out of the equation, leaving New York all for himself. By now, Black Cat has managed to steal 3 of the 4 drives, but now knowing where to go, Spider-Man rushes to the location of the 4th in hopes of stopping her. Once again, however, she beats him there, leading to a chase across the city, at the end of which Spider-Man is finally able to catch up with her. At which point, he's able to convince her to not go through with her plan, and help Peter take Hammerhead down in exchange for helping him save her son, something he feels an additional responsibility to do, given that he believes the boy to be his own son. Felicia tells Peter that not too long ago, Hammerhead purchased a vault that he stores all of his high-end valuable items in, and tells him that she's quite certain that's where her son is being kept as well. Spider-Man is able to uncover the vault's location, and the two of them head there together. Upon reaching the vault, they also realize that Hammerhead and his goons have stolen all of the Sable International weaponry and technology that was impounded by the NYPD after the Devil's Breath incident, which of course means they're now going to be pretty heavily armed. Unsurprisingly, Spider-Man ends up having to fight plenty of Magia goons, and when he does, he finally makes it inside the vault. He learns that he's been fooled by Black Cat yet again, because what was being kept in the vault wasn't her son, but the 5th drive, Hammerhead's own. Felicia tells Peter that she's been giving Hammerhead fake drives, and then she now has all 5 in her possession. What's more, she doesn't have a son at all, having made up the whole story so that Spider-Man would have been tricked into helping her, and with that, she flees from the scene. Peter is able to make his way out as well, though not long afterward he learns that having found out Black Cat's betrayal, Hammerhead is now out for revenge, and he's rigged her penthouse to blow. Peter tries to get in there in time but is unsuccessful and watches as Felicia's penthouse explodes, seemingly killing her. That's where the first episode of The City That Never Sleep ends, paving the way for the second episode titled Turf Wars, which picks up the story just a few days after episode 1. As the second DLC episode kicks off, chaos has erupted all over New York. Armed with high-tech weaponry of Sable International, Hammerhead's family has the clear edge over its enemies, and in response, the other 4 Magia families have joined forces to take him and his followers down. With the city caught in the middle of a full-blown gang war, Spider-Man is also working with the police in a much more direct manner. He learns from his friend on the force, Yuri Watanabe, that the NYPD has learned the location of one of Hammerhead's bases, and that there's a good chance that Hammerhead himself might be there. With Yuri and a squad of cops, Spider-Man heads to the base, though it turns out to be a trap and turns into an absolute bloodbath. Hammerhead mows down the entire squad and manages to escape, leaving Spider-Man and Yuri as the only survivors. That, as you might imagine, isn't something that Yuri takes very well. She is left deeply traumatized, and telling her that he will make sure Hammerhead is caught, Peter asks her to take some time off so she can properly grieve. But things don't go exactly to plan for him. He learns of a couple major steps that Hammerhead is planning on taking. For starters, he intends to abduct the other 4 Magia Dons, his main rival in his bid for power. In addition to that, Peter also learns that Hammerhead is after something known as Project Olympus, though details on what exactly that is remain elusive. Choosing to focus on the more pressing concern, Peter works with the NYPD as he attempts to stop the abduction of the other Dons. He fails, and later finds himself fighting against Hammerhead's forces, who are attacking NYPD convoys throughout the city. While he's distracted with that, however, Hammerhead breaks into the police precinct, which is where Project Olympus, a Sable International weapon of some sort, is being kept. Hammerhead kills several cops, steals Olympus, and flees. In the aftermath of this series of disasters, Yuri is, as you might expect, not happy. Frustrated with the lack of progress that Spider-Man and the NYPD have made in their attempts to bring Hammerhead in, she decides to break out on her own and go after him all by herself. She tells Spider-Man that if he tries to intervene, she'll have him arrested, before then going on to brutally gun down several Magia henchmen. Following this, MJ does some digging into Yuri's past and learns that her father used to be a police officer as well, though he was dismissed from the force and arrested for taking bribes from Hammerhead. In her own career as a cop, Yuri has been moving precinct from precinct, single-mindedly focused on Hammerhead, presumably fueled by her own personal vendetta. Back to the story at hand, however, there are more pressing matters at hand for Spider-Man to deal with, because, as it turns out, Hammerhead intends to execute the four Magia Dons that he's abducted and broadcast it live to all of New York in a bid to firmly cement himself as the new criminal kingpin of the city. Spider-Man rushes to the location, and though he's able to save the four Dons, it's not long before Hammerhead himself crashes onto the scene, and crashes really is the right word, because he's now equipped himself with Olympus, which, it turns out, is a massive exoskeleton that's made him even more dangerous. Somehow, Spider-Man manages to defeat Hammerhead, though before the NYPD can move in and put the criminal under arrest, Yuri arrives on the scene, fueled purely by revenge by this point. Yuri shoots Hammerhead in the head, though Spider-Man intervenes at the last second, causing her bullet to miss its mark and hit the metal plate in Hammerhead's head, leaving him only unconscious rather than dead. Later, in the back of an ambulance, Hammerhead is tased back into consciousness by one of his goons, who was disguised as a paramedic. Here we head into the third and final chapter of The City That Never Sleeps, titled Silver Lining, which, as its name suggests, brings Silver Sable back into the fold. By the time episode 3 kicks off, Yuri's been kicked off the force, and by now she's fully turned into a ruthless vigilante who's been executing Magia henchmen all over the city. But that's the least of New York's problems, because by now, Hammerhead, who's recovered from Yuri's gunshot to his head, and his goons essentially rule over the city, thanks to the Sable weaponry that they've got in their arsenal. Meanwhile, MJ has also discovered the full extent of what Project Olympus is, an initiative that was jointly funded by Oscorp and Sable International, meant to create super soldiers through the use of experimental exoskeletons and bioenhancement technology. But Silver Sable has no intention of sitting back and watching her technology be apprehended and used by Hammerhead. While more importantly, she also needs that weaponry for herself, since her country, Symkaria, is currently caught in the midst of a civil war. And so she returns to New York, and promptly afterward is met by Spider-Man, who's all too familiar with her knack for causing chaos and pouring gasoline on already explosive situations. This time, in fact, he's able to convince her to work with him. Eventually, they manage to track down the location of Hammerhead, though when their paths cross, things once again don't go well for the good guys. By now, thanks to the Olympus exoskeleton, Hammerhead has managed to turn himself into a full-on cyborg. Spider-Man and Silver Sable take him on, with the latter even using her jet, though Hammerhead proves to be too powerful for them. The fight goes from bad to worse, and just as things are looking dire for Peter, he's rescued by someone he'd never expected to see again. Black Cat, who'd faked her death, arrives on the scene and rescues Peter, managing to escape as Hammerhead takes Silver Sable captive. Felicia apologizes to Peter for everything that's transpired between them amidst this whole Hammerhead mess, and gives him one of the 5 drives that she'd stolen earlier, telling him that it holds the information he needs to be able to beat the Magia Don. She leaves, and Peter immediately sets out to find and rescue Silver Sable. He manages to track her down not long afterward, finding her being held captive by Hammerhead's goons in an underground hideout in the sewers. After defeating the goons, the two of them discover, thanks to Felicia's drive, that the steel plate inside Hammerhead's head is sensitive to heat, which means if they can melt it and leave him vulnerable, they'll be able to defeat him. They proceed to outfit Silver Sable's jet with a powerful laser, following which they once again take on Hammerhead for round 2. A climactic fight follows, but together, Spider-Man and Silver Sable are finally able to overpower Hammerhead. The fight ends with Silver Sable melting the steel plate in his forehead, and while he's vulnerable, crashing her jet right into him, finally downing him for good. Afterward, with the threat of Hammerhead and the Magia families finally having been dealt with, Silver Sable returns to Symkaria with all of her weaponry and equipment in tow. In a post-credits scene, it's also revealed that Peter has started training Miles to become the new Spider-Man and protect New York by his side. And that's where The City That Never Sleeps ends. Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales is set about a year after the events of the first game, and quite a lot has happened in that time. First and foremost, Miles has been training with Peter and has, by now, also taken on the mantle of Spider-Man, with the two working as partners in stopping crimes and protecting New York.
Young and inexperienced as he is though, Miles hasn't fully settled into the role yet. Things are changing in his personal life as well. He and his mom, Rio Morales, have moved into a new apartment in Harlem where Rio is also in the process of running for city council. As the game kicks off, Miles and Peter are on what's supposed to be an ordinary mission for New York's two Spider-Men. Several straggling criminals who escaped from the raft during the events of the first game are being transported to the rebuilt and refortified prison, and both Spider-Men plan on swinging alongside the convoy to make sure that things go smoothly. But of course, they don't go smoothly. Miles, who's a bit too eager in his newfound responsibilities as Spider-Man, ends up causing an accident that results in the escape of many of the captured criminals, which unfortunately includes Rhino. The armored giant goes on the run with Peter and Miles trying to stop him while he rampages through the city. Their chaotic chaos brings them to an abandoned lot in Harlem owned by Roxxon Energy Corporation, where Rhino is able to overpower Peter and knock him unconscious. Miles takes on Rhino alone, and the threat and adrenaline of the fight causes a reaction inside him that awakens a new bioelectricity power in him. Using his new powers, Miles is able to defeat Rhino. Not long afterward, Roxxon Energy Security floods the scene, led by the company's head of R&D, Simon Krieger, who tells the Spider-Men that they will hold Rhino in custody and wait for the police to arrive. Peter and Miles leave the scene, and as they're decompressing after that unexpectedly chaotic event of the day, Peter tells Miles that for the next few weeks he's not going to have him as backup. MJ is traveling to Symkaria to cover the ongoing civil war there, and Peter is going with her as her field photographer, which means that for at least a while, Peter is entrusting the city's care to Miles, who's going to be, at least temporarily, New York's only Spider-Man. Simultaneously overwhelmed and eager to prove that he's up to the task, Miles prepares to head back home, but is informed by his best friend Genki, who's aware that he is Spider-Man and is staying over at Miles' place while his parents are away for Christmas, that there's a break-in going on at Roxxon Plaza. When Miles reaches the place, he discovers that the people responsible for the break-in are a new gang known as the Underground, who are led by someone known as the Tinkerer. Not only is the Underground equipped with highly advanced technology and weaponry, they're also trying to find a way to steal something called Nuform, a new and experimental power source created by Roxxon. Miles is able to stop the Underground goons and send them packing, after which he finally heads back home. At home, he, Genki, and Rio have a pleasant Christmas dinner, where they're also joined by a surprise guest, Finn Mason, Miles' best friend from middle school. The two haven't spoken in a few months, what with Miles having moved to Harlem and Finn being busy with stuff in her own life that she's not too keen to talk about. But when Rio invites her to dinner, Finn doesn't refuse. Not long afterward, the very next day in fact, Miles reunites with someone else he hasn't been in touch with for a while, his uncle Aaron Davis, his late father's brother. Though Aaron and Miles had always been very close, after the two brothers had a falling out, Miles was forced to keep his distance, which was made that much more difficult for him because his parents refused to tell him exactly what it was they had a falling out over with Aaron. Back to the present day though, using an app created by Genki that lets New York citizens request Spider-Man's aid, Aaron gets in touch with Miles and reveals to him that he knows he's Spider-Man. Soon afterward, Miles is put through the first real test as New York City's sole protector while Peter is away, while attending a rally for his mother's election, of all places, because in the middle of the rally, the Underground strikes again. Its target, of course, is Roxxon once again, more specifically Nuform. As Spider-Man, Miles takes on the Underground forces as they attack a Roxxon transport that's carrying Nuform, though things go catastrophically wrong. While in the process of fighting the Underground on a bridge, Miles releases his bioelectricity powers, which he and Genki have dubbed Venom powers, which is bound to be confusing in Spider-Man 2. Miles' Venom powers react with Nuform, causing most of it to explode. That in turn causes the bridge they're on to crumble. Miles rushes to salvage it, and though he fails, he's able to rescue the citizens who are trapped in the debris that are about to fall. While that's going on, however, the Underground's leader, Tinkerer, arrives and is able to steal some of the Nuform. As the Tinkerer is leaving, Miles is also able to learn who exactly the Underground's leader is, and as it turns out, it's none other than Finn. To top it all off, amidst all of this chaos, when Roxxon forces finally arrive on the scene and witness the destruction, they turn their guns on Spider-Man, though once again the situation triggers something in Miles, and he finds that he's able to turn himself invisible. Using his camouflage ability, he escapes from the scene and heads back home, Feeling utterly defeated and wondering if, after the incident on the bridge and his failure to stop the underground, he has what it takes to be Spider-Man. Here, Genki proves to be the mental and moral support that Miles needs. After hearing from his friend that as New York's only Spider-Man, he needs to step up and take charge of the situation, Miles creates an entirely new Spidey suit for himself, after which he gets his head down and dives headfirst into investigating Finn and the underground. Sure enough, his investigation yields results, and he discovers some surprising information. Miles discovers that Nuform was created by Finn's brother, Rick Mason, who used to be one of Roxxon's top scientists. His work with Nuform, however, made him sick, and after realizing the dangers of what he had created, he and Finn tried to work together to expose its secrets and shut it down. In the process of doing so, however, while inside a Roxxon facility, Rick was captured and killed by Simon Krieger, who would go on to take credit for Nuform and call it his own creation. Finn was able to escape after witnessing her brother's capture and dropped her phone in a hurry while doing so, which incidentally was also recording the entire incident. Hoping to retrieve that phone and use it as evidence against Roxxon, Miles heads to one of the company's facilities where he has a run-in with someone he would never have expected. Miles crosses paths with the Prowler, an armored mercenary and notorious criminal who, it is revealed, is none other than his uncle Aaron. As it turns out, this is why Aaron and Miles' father Jefferson had their falling out. After the latter discovered that his brother was the criminal known as the Prowler, he, an honest police officer, could no longer trust him or even look him in the eye. Aaron tells Miles that he's been keeping an eye on him and warns him that he shouldn't be messing with Roxxon, who are more dangerous than he might expect. But when Miles refuses to listen to him, Aaron agrees to help him out. Together, the two of them move through the facility and are able to retrieve Finn's phone. As they're leaving, however, things go more than a little off track, and during their successful yet chaotic escape, the phone ends up destroyed. Later, Aaron tells Miles that if he wants to stop the ongoing war between the Underground and Roxxon, the best move would be for him to use his friendship with Finn to infiltrate the Underground. And though deceiving his friend isn't something he wants to do, Miles realizes that this is indeed his best option right now. Upon Miles' insistence then, Finn agrees to let him join the Underground, even though she's initially reluctant to do so. After which she takes him into their headquarters, which interestingly enough is in the abandoned Fisk Tower. Once inside, Miles learns that the reason the Underground is working for Finn is because she helped arm and equip them by creating their new high-tech weapons, in exchange for which they're helping her take down Roxxon. And how exactly does she plan on doing that? Using the Nuform she stole, Finn intends to sabotage the Nuform reactor at Roxxon Plaza and cause it to explode, in turn exposing the side effects of the experimental energy source. That, of course, is something that Miles cannot let Finn do, though his plans to infiltrate the Underground are quickly brought to a premature end. As Spider-Man, Miles locks horns with the Tinkerer not long afterward, and just as she's on the verge of killing him, he's forced to take off his mask and reveal his identity. Seeing who she's about to kill, Finn stops and flees. Later, though, she feels betrayed and obviously doesn't appreciate being lied to. Finn agrees to meet with Miles to hear him out, but their meeting is interrupted by Roxxon forces, who, surprisingly enough, are accompanied by Rhino, who's been equipped with a new, more powerful exoskeleton. As it turns out, rather than handing him over to the police, Roxxon recruited Rhino and gave him an even more powerful suit to wreak havoc with. With his help, Roxxon is able to capture both the Tinkerer and Spider-Man and take them to one of Roxxon's facilities, where Miles is briefly questioned and tortured by Simon Krieger. Miles and Finn are able to free themselves though, and while in the facility, Miles learns some more surprising information. For starters, he learns that Krieger made modification to Roxxon Plaza's reactor, which, if Finn does indeed sabotage it, it will cause an explosion so devastating that it will destroy not just the plaza, but all of Harlem. On top of that, Miles also learns that as the Prowler, his uncle has been working with Roxxon. In fact, it was him who gave up Miles and Finn's location to the company after learning that they were meeting. And though he told Roxxon not to hurt Miles, its soldiers and Rhino obviously didn't pay much heed to his words. Miles doesn't have much time to digest this information though, because as he and Finn are escaping from the facility, things get heated. The pair are attacked by Rhino, and together they're able to defeat him. Finn tries to end the fight by landing a killing blow, but Miles stops her at the last moment. Later, he tries to tell her that if she goes through with her plan, she'll destroy all of Harlem and kill everyone in it. But Finn, enraged as she is at Miles' constant interventions and the many lies he's told her, doesn't believe him. Before leaving, she violently lashes out, knocking him out. Thoroughly bruised and battered by this point, an injured Miles is brought home by Genki, where, as luck would have it, Rio too learns that he is Spider-Man. Her reaction, however, is not to be freaked out, but to support her son and tell him that he cannot give up, and that he has to keep fighting to stop Roxxon and the Underground, and to stop Finn from destroying Harlem. With Genki and Rio's help, Miles recovers and heads back out to try and stop Finn, though he hits another major obstacle. He's taken captive by the Prowler and thrown into an underground cell. Aaron, believing that Miles is in over his head, tells him that if he keeps heading down this path, he'll end up dead like his father. Not wanting to lose his nephew like he lost his brother, Aaron has taken it upon himself to make sure that Miles doesn't do anything reckless, and knowing that he won't listen to what he has to say, has decided to keep him captive. Miles, however, is able to escape, after which he defeats the Prowler in a fight, telling him that he can't turn his back on people that need him, and that he has to stop the Tinkerer because of what's at stake. Now, with all the obstacles finally out of the way, Miles rushes to Roxxon Plaza to try and stop Finn, though Harlem has erupted into chaos by this point, with the Underground and Roxxon violently fighting each other throughout the district. Miles makes his way through the chaos to the plaza while Rio and Genki join in with the evacuation efforts, and are also aided by the Prowler. And though Miles is able to make it to Roxxon Plaza, he's not able to do it in time. Finn is there already and has put the new form into the reactor, and stops Miles when he tries to remove it. The two fight, and though Miles emerges victorious, by this time the reactor has grown extremely unstable, and things have gone too far for Miles to be able to stop them. He tries to absorb the new form's energy, but quickly realizes that he's taken too much in. If he releases the energy, then many people in the vicinity of the plaza will all die. Having seen the error of her ways by now, Finn grabs Miles and flies up into the sky, taking him clear of the city, where he's able to release all the energy. Harlem witnesses the resulting explosion from hundreds of feet below. The explosion kills Finn, and Miles crashes back into the ground, where the people on the scene hail Miles as a hero and accept him as Harlem's own Spider-Man.
Hey, get out of here, kid. We'll take care of them.
Did you see his face?
You did good, Spider-Man.
Thanks.
Who is he?
That guy? He's our Spider-Man.
4 weeks later, things have mostly calmed down. Though Finn is dead and the Underground is no longer active, Roxxon has been having its fair share of troubles as well. Aaron Davis turned himself into the authorities, and thanks to his testimonies, not only has Roxxon been hit with a flurry of lawsuits, Simon Krieger has also been arrested. As the game comes to a close, Peter, who's returned from Symkaria, commends Miles on how well he's grown into his role as New York's new Spider-Man, before the two head out into the city together once again. Like its predecessor, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales also has a mid-credits scene, and it's one that sets some interesting things for the future. Harry Osborn is shown still suspended in a tank, covered in tendrils of the symbiote, while being overseen by Oscorp scientist Dr. Kurt Connors and his father, Norman Osborn. Under Norman's orders, and in spite of Connor's insistence that his condition is unstable, Harry is released from the tank, ready to be brought back into the world. And that's where Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales ends.
The wait for Marvel Spider-Man 2 is slowly drawing to a close, with the open-world superhero title launching this week. Fortunately, it's available to preload on PS5, so you can download it now and start playing as soon as it releases. 10 months after the events of Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales, Peter Parker, Mary Jane Watson, and Miles Morales face new challenges. Peter reunites with his friend Harry Osborn for a new initiative. But things take a turn when Kraven and his hunters arrive in the city. There's also the mysterious symbiote, which chooses Peter as a host and grants new abilities at the cost of his well-being. There's not a lot of time left now, as the game launches on October 20th on the PlayStation 5. So, what are your thoughts on our complete recap of the Spider-Man series?
Hey, did you know that we at Gaming Vault upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.